The flames reached 40 feet into the Afghan night, turning the crashed helicopter into a funeral pyre that no one was supposed to survive. Ammunition cooked off inside the wreckage, sending rounds screaming in every direction while jet fuel pooled and ignited in waves of orange death. Every operator on that mountainside knew the truth. Anyone still inside that bird was already gone. But Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez didn't hear the screaming warnings from her teammates. She didn't register the hands grabbing at her vest, trying to hold her back. All she heard was the weak voice crackling through her earpiece, the voice of Commander James Morrison, the man who had trained her, believed in her when no one else would, saying 3 words that changed everything. "I'm still here." What happened next defied every survival instinct, every tactical protocol, every rational calculation of risk versus reward. She ran directly into an inferno that had already claimed 2 lives, ignoring the explosive rounds detonating around her, the superheated air that scorched her lungs with every breath, and the certain knowledge that the fuel tanks could blow at any second. Her teammates watched in horror, convinced they were witnessing her final moments. 37 seconds. That's how long she was inside that burning wreckage. 37 seconds that felt like 37 years to everyone watching. And when she emerged from those flames, dragging 220 pounds of wounded SEAL commander behind her, her uniform still smoking, her face blackened, her hands burned raw, she didn't collapse. She kept moving. Because in that moment, Elena Vasquez proved something that would reshape how the entire military community viewed women in combat roles. But here's the question that haunted everyone who witnessed that night. What drives a person to run towards certain death when every fiber of their being screams to run away? Was it training? Was it loyalty? Or was it something deeper, something forged through years of being told she didn't belong, that she would never be good enough, that women had no place in the arena of warriors? Elena Vasquez grew up in a small Texas town where Friday nights meant football and Sundays meant church, where expectations for young women were clearly defined and rarely questioned. Her father had served 2 tours in Vietnam, returning with a Purple Heart, a permanent limp, and stories he never told. Her mother worked double shifts at the local hospital, raising 3 children on nursing wages and sheer determination. From her earliest memories, Elena understood sacrifice. She understood that some things mattered more than comfort, more than safety, more than self. When she announced at 17 that she intended to join the army, her father said nothing for 3 full minutes. Then he looked at her with eyes that had seen things no human should witness and asked a single question. "Do you understand what you're asking of yourself?" She didn't, not really, not then. But she would learn. Basic training at Fort Jackson was designed to break recruits down and rebuild them as soldiers. For Elena, it was something more. It was the first test of a lifetime of tests that would push her past every limit she thought she had. The drill sergeants didn't care that she could outrun half the men in her platoon. They cared that she was female, that she represented a change many of them resisted, that her success or failure would be scrutinized in ways her male counterparts would never experience. She learned quickly that excellence wasn't enough. She had to be exceptional just to be considered acceptable. The physical demands were relentless. 5-mile runs before dawn, endless push-ups in the South Carolina humidity, obstacle courses that left her muscles screaming and her hands bleeding. But Elena discovered something about herself during those brutal weeks. She had a capacity for suffering that surprised even her. When other recruits quit, she kept going. When her body begged for rest, her mind pushed harder. She graduated in the top 5% of her class, earning her first Army Commendation Medal for leadership during a particularly grueling field exercise. Her first assignment took her to Fort Bragg, where she trained as a combat medic. The instruction was intense, combining the pressure of emergency medicine with the chaos of battlefield conditions. She learned to insert chest tubes while explosions simulated around her, to treat sucking chest wounds while instructors screamed conflicting orders, to make life-or-death decisions in seconds when hesitation meant death. Her instructors noted her unusual calmness under pressure, her ability to think clearly when others panicked. One sergeant wrote in her evaluation, "Vasquez possesses the rare combination of technical competence and emotional intelligence required for the most demanding combat environments." But it was during her first deployment to Iraq in 2007, that Elena truly understood what she had signed up for. The violence was immediate and personal in ways training could never replicate. Her convoy was hit by an IED during her second week in country, killing the driver and wounding 3 others. With ears ringing and blood running down her face from shrapnel wounds, she pulled her teammates from the burning vehicle and treated their injuries while rounds cracked overhead. That night, alone in her quarters, she allowed herself to shake, to feel the terror she had suppressed during the attack. And then she got up, checked her equipment, and prepared for the next mission. That was the job. That was the life she had chosen. The path to becoming attached to special operations units wasn't one Elena had planned, but it found her nonetheless. Her performance during that first Iraq deployment caught the attention of a special forces captain who needed a combat medic with her particular skill set for a sensitive mission. What was supposed to be a temporary assignment became a career-defining opportunity. She proved herself so thoroughly that when she returned stateside, requests for her services came from units she had never imagined working with. The special operations community was a different world entirely. The standards were higher, the missions more dangerous, the margins for error non-existent. Elena understood that she was entering spaces where women were still largely unwelcome, where she would need to prove herself constantly, where any mistake would be attributed not just to her, but to her entire gender. It was exhausting and unfair, but she refused to let the weight of that burden slow her down. Her reputation grew through a series of deployments that took her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the urban battlefields of Mosul. She earned her combat medical badge during a particularly vicious firefight in the Karengal Valley, treating 7 wounded soldiers while enemy fire shredded the trees around her position. A Special Forces sergeant later told her that she had saved at least 3 lives that day through skill and sheer refusal to give up on men who should have died. The comment meant everything to her, not because she needed validation, but because it confirmed that her presence in these units added value, that she belonged. Commander James Morrison entered her life during her 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. He was leading a SEAL team tasked with high-value target captures in Helmand Province, and he had specifically requested Elena based on her reputation. Their first meeting was brief and professional. He shook her hand, looked her in the eye, and said simply, "I've heard you're the best. Don't prove me wrong." She didn't. Over the following months, Elena operated alongside Morrison's team on some of the most dangerous missions of the war. She learned the rhythms of their operations, earned their trust through competence and composure, and slowly became an integral part of a unit that initially regarded her with skepticism. Morrison himself became something of a mentor, teaching her the nuances of special operations that went beyond her medical training. He saw potential in her that she hadn't recognized in herself, pushing her to develop tactical skills that would serve her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The bond between them was professional but profound. Morrison had lost a daughter to cancer when she was just 16, and though he never spoke of it directly, Elena sensed that his investment in her growth carried echoes of that loss. She, in turn, found in him the kind of leader she aspired to become, someone who led through example, who never asked his team to do anything he wouldn't do himself, who valued every life under his command equally. The mission that would change everything began like dozens before it. Intelligence indicated a high-value Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters in a compound near the Pakistani border. The terrain was brutal, steep mountains, limited helicopter landing zones, enemy territory in every direction. Morrison's team would insert by helicopter, move on foot to the target compound, execute the capture or kill mission, and extract before dawn. Elena would accompany them as the primary medical support. The insertion went smoothly, the helicopters putting them down in a narrow valley 3 kilometers from the objective. The team moved with practiced efficiency through the darkness, utilizing night vision and years of experience to navigate terrain that would challenge Olympic athletes in daylight. Elena kept pace without complaint, her medical kit weighing 40 pounds on her back, her rifle ready for the engagement she hoped wouldn't come. They reached the compound and executed the assault with surgical precision. The high-value target was eliminated along with 6 enemy fighters, with no friendly casualties. It was textbook special operations, The kind of mission that would never make headlines, but would save countless lives by removing a key enemy leader from the battlefield. As they prepared for extraction, Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Another mission accomplished, another step toward eventual rotation home. The first rocket-propelled grenade hit their extraction helicopter before it even touched down. The explosion sent shrapnel screaming through the air, wounding 2 operators and killing the crew chief instantly. The second helicopter, carrying Morrison and half the team, banked hard to avoid the same fate, but couldn't escape the ambush entirely. A burst of heavy machine gun fire tore through its tail section, sending it spinning into the mountainside 200 meters away. Elena watched in horror as the helicopter impacted and immediately burst into flames. The fuel tanks ruptured on impact, creating an inferno that lit up the entire valley. Around her, the remaining team members were engaged in a desperate firefight with an enemy force that outnumbered them significantly. She had wounded men who needed her attention right here, right now. But through her earpiece, she heard Morrison's voice, weak but alive, calling for help from inside that burning wreckage. In that moment, Elena faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. The tactical situation was clear. She had wounded men at her position who would die without immediate treatment. The helicopter was fully engulfed in flames, ammunition was cooking off inside, and the fuel tanks could explode at any moment. Running toward that inferno was suicide. Every piece of her training screamed at her to stay, to treat the wounded she could reach, to accept that some losses were unavoidable. But something deeper than training took over. Morrison had believed in her when no one else would. He had given her opportunities that shaped her entire career. And he was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to give up. She couldn't abandon him. She wouldn't. Elena sprinted toward the flames before anyone could stop her. She heard voices screaming behind her, "You'll die." But they seemed distant, irrelevant, drowned out by the roar of the fire and the pounding of her own heart. The heat hit her like a physical wall, searing her exposed skin, making every breath feel like inhaling broken glass. She pulled her shirt over her mouth and nose, offering minimal protection against the smoke and superheated air. The helicopter's cockpit had been crushed on impact, but the cargo area was partially intact. Through the flames and smoke, she could see movement. Morrison, struggling to free himself from the wreckage while fire crept toward his position. She could also see 2 other shapes, motionless, clearly beyond help. The pilot and co-pilot had died on impact. Rounds were still cooking off inside the aircraft, the ammunition storage compromised by the fire. Each explosion sent debris flying unpredictably, forcing Elena to move in erratic patterns to avoid being hit. She reached Morrison and found his left leg pinned under a twisted section of the helicopter's frame. The metal was hot enough to burn through her gloves as she grabbed it, but she pulled anyway, her muscles straining against weight that should have been impossible to move. Morrison screamed in pain as his leg came free, the bone clearly fractured in multiple places. Elena grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him toward the opening she had used to enter, but the fire had grown, cutting off her escape route. For a moment, pure terror gripped her. They were going to die here, burned alive in this metal coffin. Then training reasserted itself, and she spotted another potential exit, a gap in the wreckage where the tail section had separated from the main fuselage. The next 30 seconds were a blur of smoke, flame, and desperate effort. She dragged Morrison through spaces barely large enough for one person, ignoring the burns on her hands, the searing pain in her lungs, the exhaustion that threatened to shut her body down completely. When she finally emerged from the wreckage, she didn't stop moving. The fuel tanks could still explode, and she needed to get Morrison to safety. Her teammates met her halfway, grabbing Morrison and helping her cover the remaining distance to their defensive position. As they cleared the danger zone, the helicopter's fuel tanks finally detonated, sending a fireball 200 feet into the sky and showering the area with flaming debris. Elena collapsed to her knees, coughing uncontrollably, her vision swimming. But she was alive. Morrison was alive. And the mission wasn't over yet. She forced herself back to her feet and began treating the wounded. Morrison's leg required immediate stabilization to prevent further damage. 2 other operators had shrapnel wounds that needed attention. Her own burns were severe enough to require treatment, but she pushed through the pain, knowing that every second mattered. The enemy was still out there, still probing their position, still trying to finish what they had started. Over the next 4 hours, Elena treated wounded men while helping coordinate their defensive perimeter. When reinforcements finally arrived at dawn, she had kept every wounded operator alive despite conditions that would have overwhelmed most medical professionals. The after-action reports would later describe her actions as extraordinary heroism under fire. But in the moment, Elena was simply doing her job, the job she had trained her entire life to perform. The aftermath of that night brought recognition Elena had never sought. Commander Morrison survived, though his leg would never fully recover, ending his operational career. From his hospital bed, he wrote a recommendation for Elena that would become legendary within special operations circles, a 3-page document detailing not just her actions that night, but her entire body of work. Concluding with words she would carry forever, Staff Sergeant Vasquez represents the finest traditions of military service. She ran towards certain death because that's who she is, a warrior who values others above herself, a leader who inspires through action, a soldier who makes all of us better by her example. She received the Silver Star for her actions, becoming one of only a handful of women to receive the nation's third-highest combat decoration. The ceremony was attended by generals and senators, by her parents and siblings, by operators from every unit she had served with. But the moment that meant most came afterward, when Morrison, walking with a cane he would use for the rest of his life, embraced her and whispered, "You gave me time with my grandchildren. I can never repay that." The recognition opened doors Elena hadn't known existed. She was invited to speak at military academies, to consult on training programs, to help develop protocols for integrating women into combat roles. She accepted these opportunities not for personal glory, but because she understood the importance of representation, of showing young women that paths existed where they had been told none were possible. Each time she stood before a room of aspiring soldiers, she thought of herself at 17, uncertain but determined, and tried to give them the guidance she had often lacked. But adjustment to her new role wasn't easy. The hypervigilance she had developed over years of combat didn't simply disappear because she was now stateside. Loud noises triggered responses she couldn't control. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by dreams of fire and screaming and the weight of wounded men in her arms. She sought help through the VA's mental health services, learning techniques to manage her symptoms while also speaking openly about her struggles. This honesty was deliberate. She wanted other veterans to see that seeking help wasn't weakness, that the strongest warriors were those who acknowledged their wounds and worked to heal them. Her relationship with Morrison continued, transformed into a friendship between equals. He would call her before major decisions, seeking her counsel, and she would visit whenever her schedule allowed. Watching him adapt to life outside special operations taught her lessons about resilience she hadn't learned in combat. He retrained himself, found new purpose in mentoring young operators, and built a life that honored his service while embracing new challenges. His example showed her that military service wasn't just about what you did in uniform, but about who you became because of it. 5 years after that night on the Afghan mountainside, Elena stood before a new generation of combat medics at the Army's prestigious training facility. The faces looking back at her were diverse in ways her own training class had not been. Men and women of every background, united by their choice to serve. She told them the story of the helicopter crash, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in the accumulation of preparation, the importance of training beyond failure, the power of bonds forged through shared sacrifice. She explained that her ability to function in that inferno hadn't come from some innate courage or special quality she possessed. It had come from years of deliberate practice, from mentors who pushed her beyond her perceived limits, from failures that taught her more than successes ever could. She described the feeling of absolute terror she experienced as she ran toward those flames, acknowledging that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She wanted them to understand that they would all face moments when their training would be tested, and that those moments would reveal not who they were, but who they had chosen to become. The questions that followed were probing and honest. A young female soldier asked how Elena had handled the constant pressure of representing her gender in male-dominated units. Elena's answer was direct. I focused on excellence and let my performance speak. I never expected fair treatment, so I never relied on it. Every obstacle became an opportunity to prove something, not to them, but to myself. Another trainee asked about the mental health challenges of sustained combat. Elena's response emphasized the importance of acknowledging struggles rather than suppressing them, of building support networks, of understanding that asking for help demonstrated strength rather than weakness. After the session, a sergeant who had served with her in Afghanistan approached with a simple question: "What do you want your legacy to be?" Elena considered the question carefully before responding. She didn't want to be remembered as a symbol or a statistic, as the woman who did anything. She wanted to be remembered as a soldier who served with integrity, who lifted others as she climbed, who proved through action that capability transcended gender. Her work now focused on systemic change within military training programs. She advocated for standards that were rigorous but achievable, that assessed capability without assuming limitation. She pushed for mentorship programs that connected experienced women in combat roles with those just beginning their journeys. And she continued to serve, transitioning from active duty to reserve status, while pursuing civilian education in emergency medicine. Her life had become a bridge between worlds, military and civilian, combat and healing, past and future. The story of Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez is not ultimately about one dramatic moment on an Afghan mountainside, though that moment crystallized everything she had worked to become. It is about the accumulation of choices, large and small, that shaped a young woman from Texas into a warrior capable of running towards certain death when everything inside her screamed to run away. It is about the mentors who saw potential others missed, the teammates who came to trust her through shared danger, the commander who gave her opportunities that changed the trajectory of her service. It is about resilience in the face of obstacles that would have broken others, about persistence when the easier path would have been surrender, about courage that was earned through discipline rather than inherited through birthright. What Elena proved on that burning helicopter was something that transcended her individual story. She demonstrated that human potential cannot be predicted by gender, that capability emerges from preparation and character rather than accident of birth, that the bonds forged in military service connect warriors regardless of how they were born. Her actions saved lives. Not just Commander Morrison's, but the lives of every future soldier whose path was made possible because she proved what women in combat could achieve. The military continues to evolve, guided in part by examples like Elena's. Standards remain high because she never asked them to be lowered. Opportunities expand because she created precedent through performance. And somewhere tonight, in a training facility or a forward operating base, a young woman is preparing for challenges she cannot yet imagine, drawing strength from stories like this one. Understanding that the path exists because others walked it first. That is Elena's legacy, not the medals or the recognition, but the doors she opened and the lives she inspired. That is what running into fire really means.